For more than 50 years, Jack Elam became one of the most familiar faces in American westerns. His sharp voice, unusual eyes, rough manner, and ability to look dangerous made him a natural choice for villains, outlaws, gamblers, gunmen, and troublemakers. Yet the man behind that frightening screen image was very different from many of the characters he played. Jack Elam was known for being funny, practical, direct, and surprisingly respectful toward the people he worked with. He often praised actors who arrived on time, knew their lines, and treated filmmaking as a serious job. That is why stories about an old Hollywood grudge are so interesting. People naturally want to know whether there was one co-star who crossed Elam badly enough that he could never forgive him. The surprising truth is that the historical record does not clearly show that Elam carried a major personal hatred toward one particular Western co-star. In fact, much of what Elam said in later interviews points in the opposite direction. He could be blunt when talking about people, and he did not hide his opinions, but he usually separated personal feelings from professional respect. He admired many of the great stars he worked beside, including Gary Cooper, John Wayne, Clark Gable, Robert Taylor, and others. When he talked about older Hollywood, his strongest complaints were often about poor preparation, forgotten directors, and the changing movie business rather than personal enemies. That makes the real story more interesting. Instead of discovering a secret villain in Jack Elam's life, we discover a man who spent decades surrounded by difficult personalities, changing trends, and Hollywood politics while keeping a surprisingly practical view of his work. His life was not built around revenge. It was built around survival, hard work, and an unusual ability to turn an unexpected injury into one of the most recognizable faces in Western movies. Jack Elam's unusual appearance began with a terrible accident when he was a child. Born William Scott Elam on November 13, 1920, in Miami, Arizona, he grew up in a difficult period and lost his mother when he was only 2 years old. His childhood was not filled with the comfort that later Hollywood success might suggest. He worked hard and experienced the ordinary struggles of a young boy growing up in Arizona. Then, during a Boy Scout meeting in Phoenix, a fight broke out between Elam and another boy. During the struggle, Elam was stabbed in the left eye with a pencil. The injury permanently blinded him in that eye. His left eye no longer moved normally, and it became one of the most noticeable features of his face. At first, the injury was simply a painful event that changed his life. Years later, however, Hollywood would turn that same injury into part of his identity. Movie audiences could recognize Jack Elam almost immediately because of his strange, wandering eye and intense expression. In an industry that often preferred perfect faces, Elam had something completely different. His appearance could not be easily copied or hidden. Directors soon realized that his face could create danger before he even said a word. His eyes could make a quiet scene uncomfortable, and his expression could make audiences wonder what his character was thinking. This helped him become one of the most reliable character actors in Western history. Yet it is important to remember that Elam did not choose this look. It came from an accident that happened when he was a child. Hollywood later found value in something that had once caused him pain. That transformation is one of the most remarkable parts of his life. The same injury that could have limited his future eventually became one of the reasons audiences remembered him for generations. Before Jack Elam became a famous actor, he had a completely different career. He served in the United States Navy during World War II and later worked as a bookkeeper and auditor. This part of his life is often forgotten because his movie career became so famous. Yet his years working with numbers help explain the way he later talked about acting. Elam was not someone who treated Hollywood like a magical world. He saw it as a business. He understood money, contracts, budgets, and the practical side of making movies. His work brought him into contact with Hollywood companies and people, including Samuel Goldwyn's studio and the production business connected with William Boyd's Hopalong Cassidy franchise. Elam eventually became involved in the financial side of film production. For a time, he was making a respectable living through accounting and auditing. He later said that he took pride in being good at that work. He liked the fact that numbers could provide clear answers. If the books balanced, there was a result that could be checked. Acting was different. One person might love an actor's performance while another might dislike it. A director might want something different from an actor than an audience expected. Elam understood that uncertainty, but he still approached acting with the same practical attitude he had developed as an auditor. Eventually, doctors warned him that spending long hours staring at columns of numbers could put his remaining good eye at risk. Because his injured eye was already blind, losing the other eye could have left him without sight. That forced Elam to reconsider his career. Hollywood was already familiar to him through his financial work, and he eventually found a way into acting. Instead of following the traditional path of becoming a stage actor and waiting for someone to discover him, Elam used his knowledge of the movie business to help arrange financing for Western productions. In return, he gained acting opportunities. His acting career began almost like a business deal. That unusual beginning helped shape the practical attitude he carried throughout the rest of his life. Jack Elam quickly discovered that his appearance could make him valuable in westerns. He began taking villainous roles and supporting parts, and his career steadily grew during the 1950s. His early work included films such as Rawhide, a movie that Elam later remembered as a major turning point because it opened the door to steady employment. He became one of those actors Hollywood could call whenever a story needed a dangerous-looking man. His face was so recognizable that audiences often understood his character before he even spoke. He appeared in many famous television westerns, including Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, Bonanza, Cheyenne, Lawman, Have Gun, Will Travel, Rawhide, and other popular shows. But Elam was more talented than simply playing villains. He eventually showed that he could handle comedy just as well as danger. One of the biggest changes in his career came when he worked with James Garner in Support Your Local Sheriff. In 1969. Instead of being a straight villain, Elam played a comic character, and audiences discovered a completely different side of him. His timing, facial expressions, and dry delivery made him extremely funny. He later returned with Garner in Support Your Local Gunfighter. His career had suddenly moved from frightening Western villain to comic character actor. This change proved that his unusual face was not his only talent. He understood timing, silence, and small expressions. He could make an audience nervous without speaking, but he could also make them laugh with the same face. That range helped him remain employed long after many actors from the classic Western era had disappeared from regular work. Elam appeared in dozens of films and television productions throughout his career. He worked with major stars and directors, but he rarely presented himself as a glamorous movie legend. Instead, he described acting as a job. For him, the important thing was showing up, knowing the lines, doing the work, and moving on to the next project. One of the most interesting parts of Jack Elam's career came when he worked with Sergio Leone on Once Upon a Time in the West. The movie became one of the most respected westerns ever made, and Elam's opening scene became unforgettable. He plays a mysterious man waiting at a remote railway station, surrounded by heat, silence, and strange tension. One of the most memorable details is a fly that lands around his face. Elam barely needs dialogue because his expression does almost all the work. His unusual eye makes the scene even more strange. The character looks as if he might be dangerous, but the audience does not know exactly what he is thinking. Leone understood the power of Elam's face and used it perfectly. Elam later remembered working in Spain for a short period on the film, alongside actors such as Charles Bronson, Henry Fonda, Jason Robards, and Woody Strode. Yet his memories of Leone were not presented as some great personal friendship. Elam was simply practical about the experience. He knew Leone was making something unusual, but he did not build his own legend around it. This is another reason the supposed feud story becomes difficult to prove. Elam worked with many strong personalities, but his later comments usually focused on their work rather than personal hatred. When he discussed directors, he could be critical, but he could also praise them when he believed they deserved it. Burt Kennedy was especially important to him. Kennedy directed Elam many times and helped move his career toward comedy. When Elam was asked about Western directors, he placed Kennedy very high on his list, even though names such as Howard Hawks and Sergio Leone were much more famous. Elam cared about people who had actually worked with him and helped him. His loyalty toward Kennedy reveals something important about his personality. He was not simply collecting famous names. He remembered the people who gave him opportunities and treated them with respect. If there was something that truly bothered Jack Elam, it was often not a particular actor. It was a lack of professionalism and the way Hollywood sometimes forgot the people who had helped build its history. Elam admired actors who arrived on time, knew their lines, and came prepared to work. He spoke respectfully about stars such as Gary Cooper, Clark Gable, Robert Taylor, and John Wayne because he believed they understood the responsibilities of the job. He did not seem impressed by people who acted as though they were more important than everyone else on the set. This attitude was connected to his earlier life as an auditor. He believed work should be done properly. He did not need to call himself an artist or genius. He simply wanted to do his part well.